Welcome, everyone, to the Girls in Action podcast. The title has an asterisk because we want everybody, even those who self identify as women, to feel included with our podcast. Thank you. We're also here today because of the Girls Project 180, a nonprofit organization dedicated to educating young women and self-identified folks about media literacy and online activism. So, we call ourselves the Girls in Action podcast because we are a group of young people from Gen Z who are fighting for social justice. We believe that the voices and actions of young people are essential to creating lasting change. Today's episode will focus on breaking down what intersectionality means to each person in our small group, some real-life examples, and where this word even came from. But first, we're going to introduce ourselves. I'm Melissa, a Latinx teenager living in the Bay Area. My pronouns are she, her, hers.
I'm Brianna, and I'm a 17-year-old budding activist also living in the Bay Area, and my pronouns are she, her, and hers.
I'm Naya, and I'm a 14-year-old Indian teen also living in the Bay Area. My pronouns are she, her, and hers.
I'm Nava, and I'm 12 years old, mixed Black teen, living in the Bay Area, and my pronouns are she, her, hers.
Awesome. Now we're going to talk about where the word intersectionality came from. Brianna, take it away.
Thanks, Melissa. So before we can have a conversation about intersectionality, we have to have a decent understanding of what it is. So the term intersectionality was coined by a brilliant lawyer, philosopher, and civil rights activist, Kimberly Crenshaw, and in her 1989 essay called Demarginalizing the Intersection of Race and Sex, a Black feminist critique of anti-discrimination doctrine, feminist theory, and anti-racist politics, she speaks about her experiences as a Black woman and explains that these experiences cannot be understood by regarding her being Black and being a woman as independent identities. We have to acknowledge that these two identities are overlapping and that they reinforce each other. This is essentially the definition of intersectionality. It's the interconnected nature of one's identities and how they overlap to create complex and compounded systems of discrimination.
I love how you explained it. And just to be clear, does intersectionality only apply to race and gender, or can it include other identities as well?
Race and gender are just a few of the many different identities that are discussed in today's conversations about intersectionality. Also often included in the conversation is gender expression, sexual orientation, socioeconomic status, physical and mental ability, religion, language, age, physical attractiveness, occupation, and education.
Now, we're all going to explain what intersectionality means to us. How does it shape our lives? I'll start. I feel like intersectionality means so many different things to me, especially as a girl and someone who is Latinx, more specifically Peruvian. Intersectionality is present in nearly every aspect of my life. As someone who wants to pursue a career in STEM, I feel like opportunities can be especially limited because of my ethnicity and gender. However, society must learn to break down the barriers of the status quo.
I'm a mixed girl who's Black, Colombian, and white. I've gotten comments on my skin, where my family comes from, and how I am Jewish. I am a Jewish Colombian/Black. I've experienced racism in so many ways, but have learned from those experiences. And now I realize there's so many other people who are getting way more racism than me, and I want to help them.
I'm an Indian girl, and I've spent most of my education being the only Indian. I have faced insensitive comments about my skin color and how I look different or less pretty from everyone else. I have learned a lot from these experiences, and I now know that there are many people struggling from discrimination, but who are using their voices in different ways.
As for me, I'm a straight, white, and cisgender girl. I definitely experience sexism, but at the same time, I know that I don't experience the same amount of discrimination that Black women or Native American women or Muslim women or disabled women do. And the discrimination that I do face because of my gender is nowhere near as complex as what I would face if I was a woman of color or a disabled woman. And this isn't to downplay the struggles that come with simply being a woman, but rather to acknowledge that, straight white women are protected from additional overlapping discrimination by our whiteness and by our straightness. that's essential to acknowledge.
I am loving this conversation. Let's keep things going by depicting some examples or case studies about intersectionality. So, as Kimberly Crenshaw puts it, without intersectionality, group unity threatens to degenerate into a compulsory uniformity that benefits some members of the group at the expense of others. For example, employment opportunities and promotions for Black workers do not necessarily provide justice for Black women. Anti-racist organizing can be uncritical about misogyny. Homophobia can seep into feminist and anti-racist mobilizations alike, while race and class privilege can be unexamined within queer politics.
Disabilities are a part of intersectionality, whether it be a physical disability or a mental disability. We are a society that treats people with disabilities with condescension and pity, not dignity and respect. Those are the words of Stella Young. Stella Young was a disability rights activist. She had osteogenesis imperfecta, which means bone imperfection and brittle bones. Stella Young had to use a wheelchair for most of her life. Stella Young worked as an educator in public programs at the Melbourne Museum, and she hosted 8 seasons of No Limits, a disability culture program on TV. She was a member of the Ministerial Advisory Council for the Department of Victorian Communities, Victorian Disability Advisory Council, Youth Disability Advisory.
Religion ties into intersectionality in a different way. Religions are different roads converging upon the same point. What does it matter that we take different roads, so as long as we reach the same point? Gandhi. Mahatma Gandhi was an Indian lawyer, anti-colonial nationalist, and political ethicist who employed nonviolent resistance to lead a successful campaign from India's independence from British rule, an intern-inspired movement for civil rights and freedom across the world. He was assassinated in 1948 on January 30th. Why do you think they shot him? Because of his skin and how he was Indian? Because he was religious? Or because he was silently protested? I think it was a mix, how those roads crossed paths to make him, and how different roads cross paths to intersect, to be intersectional.
I love how you said that. I think you really summed it up well. Another huge way that intersectionality has existed historically and today is within the feminist movement. This movement was so dominated by middle and upper class heterosexual white women that the experiences and stories of anyone who didn't fit into all of those categories were written off. This actually has happened so often that we've given it the name exclusionary feminism. Pretty self-explanatory, right? This type of feminism that centers itself around the experiences of a small percentage of very privileged white women does little to nothing to further the progress of women of color, disabled women, and etc.
This conversation was amazing. I loved how you all put it. But unfortunately, that's all the time we have today. To wrap things up, we're going to list some resources and books you can read to learn more about intersectionality.
Some books you can read about intersectionality are Saffron Dreams from Shaila Abdullah, A Room of One's Own by Virginia Woolf.
In our next episode, we're going to be having a conversation with Hannah Waiters, our mentor, on how intersectionality defines them.
Thank you so much for tuning in. Look in our description box for additional resources and a link to our YouTube video, which has some helpful infographics about today's episode.